Welcome, everybody, to the inaugural Metaverse Standards Forum Ethics Summit. And I thank all the speakers who have agreed to share their wisdom with us today. And we hope to have a really productive conversation that will inspire people to continue their work in ethics. And in particular, in the Metaverse Standards Forum, we have the ethical principles in the metaverse working group, and we are looking for both co-chairs. I'm an interim co-chair and am not able to serve year round, but I want this group to continue and be supported. So we would welcome volunteers to help co-chair this committee. We're also doing an annual report. And so I'm the president of the Academy of Immersive Arts and Sciences, and I'm also a board member of Metaverse Standards Forum. So it is 11:05, and we're going to kick off. Mohsen Rezayat from Siemens is our first speaker. The protocol for this meeting is that we will have a countdown timer, which will be on my window there. If you could please keep an eye on it. And each speaker will have 8 minutes, and there will be a 1-minute transition. So take it away, Mohsen.
All right, so I'm the Chief Solutions Architect from Siemens Digital Industries Software. And some of you may be asking, what is digital industries? This terminology refers to businesses that are using digital technologies like software, data, and automation to make and improve products, services, and processes. Now, in my sector of Siemens, which is Siemens Digital Industry Software, we are totally consumed with trustworthy AI, which has these three pillars of robustness. Obviously, what we give to our customers has to work. It has to abide by the legal rules, and then, of course, be ethical. And the focus of the talk today is on this last component of ethics in everything that we create. Now, AI ethics, especially in digital industry software, is more critical because we're dealing with engineering and manufacturing, and safety, compliance, environmental and societal impacts are forefront for us because we sometimes also deal with human lives. So we cannot allow AI to be the final decision maker. We always have human in the loop for what we do. And that's why everything we do is AI assisted. It's not AI created because, again, humans are making the final decisions when we design systems in automotive, aerospace, and healthcare and others. And one main reason is that generative AI is notoriously for fabricating plausible but false information. And we have to really be able to flag when it comes up with a non-existent part for something that we are trying to design. It also has a tendency of doing blind optimization because when we don't specify what needs to be important to it, it puts maximizing profit forefront and ignores sustainability and long-term impact. There is also confidentiality issues, not only with our own data, but with our customers' IP. This is an ethical concern that when we deal with these public generative AI tools, what is it that we are sharing that we shouldn't be sharing with the rest of the world? So all of our engineers require citation from any interactions they have with AI. They ask it to specify uncertainty in the data that it's provided. And we constantly validate all safety critical outputs from any AI models, and especially generative AI models. Now, the reason being, there are actually real world examples for why this is important. This company that makes, that auto-generates parts is one of our competitors, and they started designing things and found out pretty soon that their managers and regulatory teams didn't trust the output because they couldn't follow or trace the design rationale. And also there's a cost to the company and environment because these are issues. There's a vast computational cost, both from the money that the company has to pay for computers in the cloud and also environmental impact, the carbon footprint of the calculations. There's also the issue of scope. When we train our AI models in, let's say, products from certain sectors, we can't generalize when we take it to the other sectors. And there is a lack of accountability here. When something goes wrong, who's responsible? The engineer, the data scientist, the AI vendor, or the model itself? And finally, we are concerned with erosion of human expertise. So how do you deal with that? We need better data governance, lifelong learning by all of our developers to avoid erosion of domain intuition. Basically use AI to get better at what you do rather than let it do all the work. And this is really the motto that we follow here. For our developers, we insist on integrating ethics into design. We create enforceable internal guidelines. For instance, we don't allow any black box models. We want explainability to be forefront. We want teams to be interdisciplinary to reduce the bias and societal impacts. And we want to involve our customers and the societies that we work in to be at the beginning in the design process with us to make sure that we are taking account of every sector. And we continuously measure impact in fairness and trust by going to our customers and getting their data and trying to make sure that the system is doing what it's supposed to do. And the companies, of course, have a lot of barriers that they have to overcome. They have all these legacy systems, lots of data that's not clean. There's a cost issue that I talked about. Employees may not have the readiness necessary. Customers may not trust what they're doing, and there's ever-increasing regulations that come about. And the solution is to continue training, put human in the loop for all decisions, provide transparency in all the outputs that your AI model gives, and also diversify the data sets and make sure that bias is taken care of and you're auditing the models continuously. And employees need to have the trust in the process and be able to
60 seconds, Mohsen.
And therefore, design support companion is the motto. We want to make sure that the final authority is with people. And there are some additional readings. I've written a bunch of blogs that I'll put two of the links here in this presentation if you want to go and read more about it. And the final slide, of course, here we are concerned with trustworthy metaverse, but AI is a major component of metaverse, and therefore there is a lot of overlap between what I just discussed and trustworthy metaverse that we are trying to get to. It has the same pillars, it has some of the same attributes, but there are some additional ones, like freedom of speech and actions when you are immersed. What can your avatars that are AI-powered do and they shouldn't do? The physical and mental health impact of dealing, and of course, desensitization and manipulation is also concepts, and there are more here. So with that, I'm done. I guess we do questions at the end, but I can hand it over.
Thank you so much, Mohsen. This was great. Really appreciated hearing Siemens' point of view and what you're doing with it. Next up, we have Asya Sergeevan. Asya, could you turn on your video and say hello to everyone here?
Perfect. So it's a big honor to me to be here. I'm Anastasia, Asya Sergeevan from University of Luxembourg. And what we're talking about today is very much resonated in our project, especially the modern presentations already tackle some points we're having in our projects. So I called my talk today as ethical guidelines for industrial use of metaverse. And do we need them? And if so, why we actually need it? Why we need a specific case when we're talking about industrial use? So basically, yes, first I would maybe mention how I came to this topic. I'm not a person who's doing basically ethics, so I am a psychologist by my background, and I work mostly in an area of organizational psychology. Means then we look how the people work and how they interact within organization between each other. And then later on, we came to the topics of how the people interact with each other using technologies. Well, this time, 20 years ago, it was more primitive one than now. But anyway, the questions was always here, how we can see that impact of technologies on the normal human-to-human ethical processes within organizations. So when we're talking about unethicality of interfaces, what basically we can talk about? And what we're thinking of, we can kind of divide them into different groups. And some of them we're probably not discussing today because we're all this people of free will and trying to contribute to the good designs of the future solutions. So sometimes the bad designs or unethical designs come by purpose. And in this case, we're talking about things like deceptive designs. Then companies or actors try to push people to do some decisions which maybe people don't want to take. However, sometimes it happens that we design things away because of lack of knowledge. We don't know the people we know who will use our product, or we're not that much sure about certain parameters, or we simply never try it. And then we do something, and it appears to be unethical. And sometimes this particular case, we try also to look in our projects, is not specifically general lack of knowledge, but rather I see the world one way. And my potential customers or my potential users see the world a bit different way, and this creates a problem. So then we design something for the industry. This is a sort of things we need to take into account. However, it's just a part of the picture. And another part of the picture, which I know quite well as an organizational psychologist, is that technically any workplace can be, by definition, not the place which always support the main ethical concerns like human rights. Not because we're doing something bad, no, I mean organizations trying to do good. But every time when we try to make something for our business goals, for example, these goals are becoming sort of priorities and they guide actions we're doing. Plus, always, most of organizations are built on sort of asymmetry of powers, means we have the board members, we have a general employees, and of course, the decisions people take are not in the same area of, let's say, effects for the organization. So of course, if some bad practices can start to happen, they started to happen in organizations as well. The question is, okay, when we try to combine these two areas, when the organizations and industry meet XR, what happens? So it can be good examples. For example, once we discussed with one of my colleagues a case, then we have virtual presentations or virtual meetings. And what happens if we just change the people's presentations as a persons into avatars? Would it be better? And maybe yes, because it will be more neutral. So all this gender or racial or whatever stereotypes can be somehow eliminated. But on the other hand, can implementation of our XR technologies can make situation worse? Yes, for sure as well, because organizations like have some surveillance and XR technologies can provide additional surveillance. Then if we implement XR technologies in the organization, they combine and situation become twice worse, not better. So of course, we would like to have scenario number one. We don't want to have scenario number two, but how can we do that? That's a question. So, of course, when we talk about, of course, we need to embed ethical values for our designs. And we need to see the boundaries of organizations, understand their business goals, understand they have some general considerations of what they wanted to have, but still try to merge these ethical human values into organizational scenarios. Sounds good, but how? Again. So, and I will briefly present in my last 3 minutes the case we did recently in this domain. So we have a project, European project about off-highway machinery, which is basically excavators, snow groomers, ridge stackers, machinery like that. We try to help them to implement some some additional XR elements. And yes, it makes sense here because it makes works better, it can make work more safe. However, how can do that and not create additional problems? Because, for example, this may be surveillance, or it's maybe oversharing, or it's maybe some consideration about over-reliance. So we applied 3 different lenses for that. And we started from privacy by design, trying to be sure that at least privacy is not at risk in the project. But then we came in the end to the considerations of how all these outcomes of the project can affect all these people working in the area. By implementing it, we create a schema, then basically we go from the end users discussion with the really people who operate these technologies up to the people who really rule the companies, knowing how the industry works and knowing these high-level considerations. And then we found some intersections between the positions of all the different stakeholders. So I will not talk in details what we found here, but it's again very much resonated to the problems we are now seeing in general in AI sector and in any other sector that we try to put in new technologies, frontiers, and don't know the effects in the end. In our case, for example, we found that, of course, one of our biggest problems is bystanders, because there is a operation machines are operating in the open area, they operate in construction sites as well. The people in this industry don't know yet that much about all these XR technologies. They don't care that much. They don't know. But we are afraid that the technology will come to them. It will be on the point that the people can't really make impact to these technologies because technologies already come into the form which designed by other works. And then we also know in these areas we already have this 24-hour surveillance. So the people
60
like to have it.
seconds, Asya.
Yeah, perfect. So the people already knows that there is a lot of cameras there, so we collect a lot of data. And the question is how to overcome it from the industry. And well, last but not least, over-reliance and cognitive mistakes in this area is much more problematic because if in real world, you just messed up with some virtual object, real object. And if it's real world for your game, for example, purposes, the only problem you can have is just kick up to the place and have some personal injuries. But if you have the problem with your machine, while doing these things, while mixing realities, it can be human damages, human loss, and big problems. And then I think we found some way to design for these technologies. And here I need basically a cooperation for the people who are listening us here. I have a link to our survey, so I will also put it on the chat. I'll be super happy if you see what we proposed in this area and give us some feedback about what can be done. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Asya. That was Asya from University of Luxembourg. Thank you for the presentation. We really appreciate it. And next up, we have Greg Lindsay. Greg, please introduce yourself and welcome.
Hi, all. I am Greg Lindsay. I'm a 2022-2023 Urban Tech Fellow at Cornell Tech. My discussion today will build off some of that work. And thank you, Asya, for the great hinge there. I think some of the stuff she, particularly in that last slide, is particularly relevant from the industrial to the urban domain. So let me quickly share my slides. And we'll get started. Already 12 seconds in. I'd like to begin with the Apple Vision Pro. We all remember this ad, and I bring it up in this use here, this sort of Apple's attempt to really create iconic MR experience here, because everything in this image, in this video from the advertising is, of course, focused on indoors use. It is focused on at-home use. It is designed to basically keep you in the comfort and safety and ethical uses of your own home. And of course, you know, this is not what happened within the first 4 hours of it going on sale. Images like this started popping up on TikTok. This, of course, as you all know, is for clout. The Apple Vision Pro doesn't work while in motion in this regard. But this, of course, is the impetus of my project for Cornell Tech. How do we prevent people from trying to use the metaverse in crosswalks or perhaps at the wheel of their Tesla autopilots? This is another video for clout, not actually real, again, not operable. But I include this because then Secretary of Transportation Pete Buttigieg felt obliged to tweet about it and to remind us to keep both hands on the wheel while driving in the metaverse. Now, I bring this up as examples because my overall point here at the beginning of this talk is that arguably all XR, and certainly anything on the augmented and mixed reality side of the spectrum of XR, is fundamentally an urban technology with urban consequences. And I bring up the Cybertruck and bring it into Pokemon Go because if you remember the infamous Death by Pokemon Go paper from 2017 by researchers at Purdue University who, in working with police in Tippecanoe County, Indiana, realized that, in fact, crashes went up around 40% near Pokestops in the first 6 months of the game because distracted drivers were accelerating into the Pokestops while playing the game while driving. So, through no fault of its own, Niantic, just like Apple in this case, had created a sort of hazard, an urban hazard that was causing harm to bystanders. And this is the researchers, if they, straight line back of the envelope, penciled out the impacts across the United States that, that potentially 250 people died because of this. And so my talk today focuses on the sort of the urban implications of this because I feel that that much of the discussion around privacy and around ethics in this is, of course, we're being user-centric. We were focused on the actual intended users of devices and technologies. But what about the unintended users, the bystanders, as Asya had there as well? This is the report that I wrote for Cornell Tech, came out in December, using a foresight methodology called threat casting. We sort of came up with 3 future threats and 3 potential areas of of how it can be used for good, as we might say. Just quickly, tech encroachment implies that basically all the sort of problems of the internet today, when it comes to content moderation, when it comes to basically hate speech and extrapolating that will extend itself into the urban sphere, not just on our screens. Augmented predation points to is that yes, that many of the scams that are perpetuated today, pig butchering and so forth, will also achieve this sort of 3rd dimension through AR, and that also that basically XR will be used as a tool, like many other tools, to perpetuate divides, whether that is to further marginalized communities or make them ripe for reinvestment. So quickly, just to ground this in current events here again, or to think through some of these issues, I'm sure you have all seen the incredibly viral video of the couple evidently caught cheating at a Coldplay concert. This is from 404 Media's headline here, where this footage, which was broadcast on a Jumbotron, so there's your right to privacy at Coldplay, was immediately used by all sorts of users across the internet using facial recognition tools to dox them, to shame them, to do these kinds of things. And it's, again, one thing when you're a CEO and it's one thing when you're at a Coldplay concert, but this will increasingly become a risk here as we exist in this sort of AR-driven, AI-powered, potential massive surveillance machine. And as an example of this, is Cluely. You may have seen this as well. They're backed by Andreessen Horowitz, just invested $20 million. Cluely is a startup that aims to help you cheat on everything. This is their initial use case. And here you can imagine that effectively, a sort of XR wearable here is being basically used to perpetuate information asymmetries against his date. He's effectively preying on her in the course of doing this. I bring this up because this is, in fact, actually similar to a concept video that came out over a decade ago with Google Glass, which is now back in the form of Android XR. And not to pick on Google, because of course this will apply. I'm very curious to hear from Anne from Meta a bit later in the program too about how they're approaching this. But from an urban perspective, this I think opens up several interesting ethical ramifications. Just this demo, of course, which comes from December's launch of Android XR. One, of course, is the privacy aspects of continuous camera footage from wearable devices necessary to basically empower the user. And again, we've seen that, this mandatory data collection is, well, it's just that it's mandatory. Meta changed its privacy policies back in May with regards to the Meta Ray bans to basically make it mandatory to capture audio recordings of interactions with a device if you are using it in active mode. So the users, of course, are being compelled to do this, and then of course potential bystanders as well. And I bring this up just to quickly show it again here in the background is, Dr. Chris Gilliard, best known as Hypervisible on Blue Sky, has coined 2 phrases that I think are relevant to this video. One is this idea of luxury surveillance, which is, of course, this is a surveillance device which offers convenience and power to the user, who in this case has the privilege of being able to afford it, ostensibly has the privilege of being shielded from any repercussions for using it. And as developers, as practitioners, I think we also have that ethical consideration of who might also be captured by it, whether they have that luxury, that privilege as well. And then the second one, as you see in Maps here, is being guided by it through the Google Maps API. Also raises this question of digital redlining. How do we know you're being guided on a path that is fair and equitable in addition to perhaps the fastest or best? And I bring this up because Casey Climes, worked at Google Maps, has pointed out that efforts to create more beautiful routes were pushed back on heavily. I'm already running out of time, but quickly, let's take this into an AI dimension. This is the trailer for Keiichi Matsuda's Agents video. This is imagining a future of what I call AIR, artificially intelligent reality, where, again, we're going to see this fusion of AI and AR and XR that we're going to talk a bit about. But it matters because, again, if you're creating for experiences in public space, like this early demo by Liquid City, InWorld, and Niantic, this is the spirit of the ferry building, an AI agent that you can chat with, and San Francisco's ferry building, ask for directions and whatnot. We're going to have ethical principles around which data sets we pull, which histories we choose to present to make sure that we're representing the underrepresented, et cetera. All these new dimensions that open up here in terms of how people are interacting with the tech in urban space is an important consideration. The Oscar music is coming soon. I'll just quickly show this one because this also applies to basically agents that will be set loose inside of map layers in mixed reality. This is the virtual and real life demo by researchers at New York University and Hong Kong University, in which they basically imagined, well, there wasn't so much XR, but actually created personas of bots here that used machine vision models to go through Google Street View and others to fulfill requests on behalf of people. So this raises questions about which maps are we going to be using? Will we have, and this is the ethics of, as practitioners, about how do we make sure that this is accessible and visible and able to people and not just built on proprietary map layers? Because we're also going to need to make XR accessible to people who cannot see them. The Gates in New York, which was a retrospective of Christo's famous installation, I think Bloomberg Philanthropies and others did a very good job of making incredibly accessible in terms of wayfinding and others for people who do not actually have the XR experience. Jackie Liu in Toronto's Digital Trust for Places and Routines has started creating a visual language of wayfinding and notifications to show to people that these experiences are present in space. There's the Oscar. And so my point is that we're, from an urban perspective, we're going to need to think about not just making this accessible to all potential users in public space, but to actually indicate to them that it's there. And that finally, it's going to be important for us as practitioners to work with city officials to make sure this happens. Because the point I made earlier about walking through the crosswalk, here you can see all the different domains that XR in an urban realm will touch upon. And this is why I've urged cities to basically both participate in groups like the MSF, and why I was very happy to have James Jackson and Stephen Smith participate in my Cornell Tech cohort.
Thanks so much, Greg. We've got a Ann up next. That was an excellent presentation. So much to unpack there. We could do a whole session on that. Certainly, I hope we've got some Q&A for you later. But next, that was Greg Lindsay from Cornell Tech and many other places as well I saw on your resume. Next, we have Ann Hobson from Meta. Are you there?
I am here.
Excellent. Did you yeah, you spotlighted yourself. So there we go. And hi, Ann. Welcome. And you have the floor.
So I wanted to share our responsible innovation approach as it relates to the development of augmented and virtual reality technologies. My name is Ann Hobson. I'm from the Reality Labs policy team. We've had these principles in action for several years now. So I wanted to give some examples of how they might apply. So our responsible innovation principles guide our work at every step of product development. The first is never surprise people. This means being explicit and transparent about how our products work and the data they collect and share. It means taking user experience and expectations into account when building products. It also means articulating best practices for responsible use in places like Meta Family Center. The second is provide controls that matter. This means aiding establishment of new norms while also setting boundaries. We provide people with controls so they can manage their experience and how they use our products. So for example, our privacy settings control whether or not you appear online on MetaQuest and who can see that you are online. The third principle is consider everyone. An essential component of developing products is proactively engaging with experts such as yourselves in human rights, privacy, safety to capture feedback and ensure that it's baked into our products. There are really difficult questions that we're posing to these communities about how they should be built. So for example, when deciding how to launch age-appropriate experiences to 10 to 12-year-olds on MetaQuest, we did a co-design with families and youth as well as third-party advisors to inform how that experience would look. The last principle I will talk about is put people first. This is an acknowledgement that our products need to deliver value back to people, whether it be the value of social connection or of economic opportunity. And our products can only do so if they're secure and trusted. I've bolded 2 of these principles because I'm going to go into some examples for each of them. So the first I want to focus on here is never surprising people. Transparency is a key component of building trust. So we focus on transparency in particular for more sensitive categories of data. So as an example, eye tracking on Quest Pro is off by default. Raw image data is processed on device and only abstracted gaze is shared with apps. We published a white paper describing our approach to protecting eye tracking data. Happy to share that with you. We also have spatial data app permissions that allow users to decide which apps have access to the data that might be picked up of their environment around them. Spatial data in this case refers to information collected about the size and the shape and the location of walls, surfaces, and objects in your physical space while you are using your MetaQuest device. Apps that blend virtual reality and real-world environments use that data to understand that space and then render objects on top of them. This control helps users make informed decisions about the apps they choose to download and use and ensures that they are aware of any potential data collection or usage. We also have a white paper on this topic as well that I'm happy to share. We also wanted to be thoughtful about how we introduce novel technologies such as our Ray-Ban Meta glasses and ensure that we're being thorough and transparent about how we approach privacy and safety. So this paper here describes our internal research and feedback process that we went through to create the bigger and brighter LED that we have today on Ray-Ban Metas. Happy to share this one as well. Our Ray-Ban Meta glasses have cameras, they have speakers, and AI built directly into the frame. This can help blind users navigate the world more easily using AI features like detailed responses, which describes objects, text, and their surroundings in real time, right from their glasses. You can activate this by saying, hey, Meta, what am I looking at? And it leverages multimodal AI capabilities to take a picture, analyze it, and help describe your surroundings. When we began thinking about how these could be used by particular communities, including the blind and low vision community, we conducted extensive user research and we held in-person focus groups and co-designs early in the design process to learn how what we were building could meet the needs of this group. We made it a point to engage directly with the community, and looking at the data that we had, we learned a ton. So for example, despite making up only 2% of the population, the blind or visually impaired users represent 14% of the total multimodal AI queries on Ray-Ban Meta. So this group was power users, and we learned that independence is a core value for this group, and people wanted the tools that help them navigate their environments without assistance from others. This makes this feature very popular among blind and low vision users. We also learned what wasn't working. So an example of this, previously, multimodal AI lacked the visual and spatial detail needed for these users to reap the full benefits of the technology. So the detailed responses feature was designed after consultation to improve that recall. We also identified partnerships to specifically support this community. We partnered with Be My Eyes to launch a feature named Call a Volunteer, which connects directly to a network of 8 million volunteers who provide assistance with everyday tasks, such as operating household appliances or checking expiration dates on food directly from the glasses. So this means a blind and low vision user can initiate this feature and talk to somebody to help them see what or describe what they're seeing and get immediate help. With that voice command, those individuals will be able to access the camera of the smart glasses and provide that audible feedback. We're happy to share additional examples of how we have applied these principles. There are more on our website. But we're also excited to talk to the members of the Metaverse Standards Forum group on how these principles should evolve, especially for novel aspects of technology like super sensing or always on sensing glasses capabilities that Greg mentioned. Thanks so much. With that, I'd love to turn it back over to Ben.
Thank you so much, Anne. And you got it in under time. I had actually started the clock a little late for you there, but that was really insightful to see all the thought that Meta has been putting in. So thank you so much for sharing that. And it was good that you ended on accessibility, because accessibility is our next talk. We have Muadh Al-Kalbani and Michael Cooper on deck, who are actually going to do a shared presentation on ethics. Gentlemen, are you here? Thank you, Anne.
Yeah, hi, this is Michael Cooper. I'll start the presentation off and speak for a couple minutes, and then turn it over to Juan. but Muadh has the slides, so if you want to share them now, we can get started. There it goes. Okay. Yeah, great. Thanks. So let's move straight on to slide 2. To introduce myself, I'm one of the co-chairs of the Accessibility Working Group in MSF, and I've spent at least 25 years working with W3C on web content accessibility guidelines and other digital technologies. I want to start by introducing you guys to some key frameworks that are important in discussion of ethics with relation to accessibility. First of all is, what is the framework driving it as an accessibility, as an ethical principle? In the past, it's been more a business case or a compassion case, not necessarily an ethical driver. The UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities puts on paper both the principles, the ethical principles that drive the decisions, and then there's a number of specific ethical sort of requirements. Here's what it means to be ethical in these various contexts. That's been signed by most countries in the world, and they have an obligation to promote the design, development, production, and distribution of accessible information and communication technologies and systems at an early stage so that these technologies and systems become accessible at minimal cost. And that is driving a number of the laws going around now, and is going to be a driver for a lot of the work that we're doing. Moving on to the next slide, I want to talk about models of disability. There's considered to be 2 ways of looking at disability. The first is called the medical model. It's where a person with a disability is viewed as having an impairment, and they might be given accommodations to support their accessibility needs. This is not always the best way to approach, and it's viewed sort of as an outdated and paternalistic model. The social model says that a disability is considered to relate to the intersection of individual characteristics and the affordances of the environment, and it's the responsibility of those building the environment to make sure that they don't create accessibility problems. So moving on to the next slide. I'm not going to read the entire slides, but intersections are contextual at different times in history. What was a disabling characteristic varied by the requirements of the environment. And then finally, on the next slide, for me, I want to talk about ethical work on accessibility. One big problem is often people, meaning well, are working on identifying problems and developing solutions without knowing the people they're working with. That is the nothing about us without us problem. So it's important to involve people with disabilities with lived experience on any type of accessibility work. Turn it over to Muadh.
Thank you, Martin. Hi, everyone. My name is Muadh. I'm a web standards technologist in XR at the Samsung Research and Development Institute here in the UK. So I wanted to firstly start with like a quick recap. This is like a snapshot from very large bodies of research that looked into accessibility barriers in XR. And you usually find accessibility barriers are categorized according to software, hardware, or ethical barriers. My main focus today is on the ethical part, of course, because I do genuinely believe they're the hardest category to solve and mitigate. They usually require solutions that go beyond software and hardware. We sometimes need to shift the way we think in society, sometimes even legally. Some of the kind of prime examples of the ethical barriers include financial affordability, so users with impairments not being able to even afford XR devices, XR literacy, and not having the necessary information, necessary kind of skills to get XR technologies up and running, and also the lack of understanding over the protection measures that are going to be available for vulnerable users once they start using shared virtual environments like the Metaverse. One particular type of barriers that I wanted to highlight is barriers to entry, and they have been defined in literature as the challenges that are faced by users either before they start using XR technologies or as soon as they start using them. So if you think of this in the context of a headset, these are the challenges that creep up to users either before they put the headset on or as soon as they put it on. And the reason why this is quite significant and has significant implications is because these barriers don't just hinder the user experience or ruin it, they can break it completely or eliminate access completely. So just to walk through a very quick scenario to showcase this point, Alice here is not a real person, but the kind of the research behind it and the story is real. So if I picked some generic steps to use XR, like where the device securely turn it on, launch the experience, and finally interact with the immersive experience. If this person has involuntary arm movements and they're not even able to put the device securely, and as you can see, their user experience stops right at that first stage, and they can't really experience anything more after that stage. So as you can see, it does have some very serious implications, the entry-level barriers, and they don't just show up at the beginning, they can also show at the interaction stage. And this is where the rule of the web kind of comes in. We do believe the web as a medium can mitigate some of these barriers, probably not all of them. So the big advantage with the web is the instant access. So anyone with a smart device and an internet connection can access any XR experience out there technically. The web is also very heavily standardized with the great work that happens at W3C through their community groups and working groups to govern the accessibility and privacy in the web to make sure that it is usable by users regardless of their abilities or disabilities. And the final, of course, big advantage is the open nature of the work that happens in the web. All the work that W3C does happens in the open. So all the features, all the discussions happens in the open, which kind of removes any barriers for the end user to raise any concerns and for their voice to be heard when it comes to specifications for the web. One particular document I want to highlight is called the ZAWR document, or the XR Accessibility User Requirements document, which is done by the APA working group at W3C. This is a great documentation that provides guidelines around what users with different impairments need to be able to use XR effectively. It's based on on large bodies of previous research that looked into XR accessibility barriers, and it's a great kind of resource for companies, startups, even individual developers to inspect and be aware of in order to know what the user requirements are to build more inclusive and accessible XR experiences. I'm going to end on kind of some of my hopes and dreams for accessibility in WebXR. The one thing I added here, which is a bit new, is the ethical principles for the web machine learning. I know the use of AI over the web is currently a very hot topic, but please note this is still in its draft stages, but please do check it out. It's because these ethical principles are currently being discussed for the web and how it should be used over the web and how AI should be used over the web. I did mention W3C quite often in this presentation, but there are also other standardization bodies out there that are doing great work. So the Metaverse Standards Forum is one of them, of course. The XR Guild and the great mission that they have behind their organization is also something that needs to get talked about more. The great work of XR Access, especially in accessibility, is something that's so good and it's ongoing as well. I guess my big message is that we should keep collaborating and we should keep exchanging ideas and talking to each other, because eventually that does lead to better standards and better, more accessible and inclusive experiences. I'm done. Thank you. That's all from me.
Thank you so much, Muadh and Michael, for the shared presentation. That was excellent and so important, and I'm so glad that you got all that WebXR in there as well. And thank you for your work with the W3C. So we've got Rolando coming up next, and I'd like to introduce Rolando Masís-Obando from Johns Hopkins. Please take it away, Rolando.
Thanks. Yeah, so it's really exciting to be here. I'm going to probably talk really fast because the timer is pretty intense. I'm Rolando. I'm a neuroscientist. I'm a filmmaker and maybe a futurist. I've learned so much from everybody that's spoken already, and there's like so much synchrony and synergy in like what I'm going to talk about. But I want to preface first that like this talk isn't against AI technology or XR technology. I use AI, I use XR, I teach it, I build with it. I'm genuinely excited by it, by what it can do. But excitement without caution can be a dangerous thing. So my opinions probably will change over time, just like, you know, a lot of norms change over time. So just wanted to preface that. So privacy is dead, right? Well, kind of. It's not that it's dead, but the conditions under which we have gotten accustomed to have changed. So when I was younger, I was obsessed with filmmaking. You know, I would take my little camera and film my family, whatever was on the kitchen table. And when I'd go outside, I'd go film people. And I can't tell you how many times when I was filming that people would like cover their face. They might get concerned and like approach me and say, ask me, why are you filming? Get mad at me. And it was like understandable, like worry, like, why am I filming them? But today, when I go out and do films and like film people, they either ignore me, perform for me, or positively engage with me, which is like a very interesting thing. And it's my point is that people today expect to be watched. So obviously this has been talked about already, but who here remembers Google Glass? It was banned from theaters, and eventually it didn't really succeed as a commercial product, ahead of its time in some ways. But a Wired journalist sort of argues that it really wasn't a failure. It was sort of a success in disguise. It was a sign that people at that moment in time had boundaries, and they sort of pushed back against this kind of thing in the name of privacy. Fast forward to now, we have Meta's Ray-Ban lenses. And this very similar technology still raises concerns, especially after those Harvard students, did that little hacking thing and did facial recognition, reverse image search, and then were able to sort of basically dox their customers' personal data. And despite this, it's still very common to get these lenses. And I have nothing against these lenses, actually. And in XR, I actually think that smart glasses are going to take a really, 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 really big, important part of the future. So I'm not really against this technology. My point isn't that the tools are bad. My point is that social norms have shifted, and the rise of social media, selfies, and digital personas has normalized being watched and watching others. I mean, I used to feel weird taking a picture of myself and sending it to someone on Snapchat. Now I'm like, let's take a selfie. Even I've changed, right? And this normalization is why modern privacy initiatives like the GDPR or equivalents in the States, like the CCPA, sort of fall short. The focus is on protecting individuals from companies' unidentifiability, but companies aren't the only ones watching us. And there's a term for this, and this was sort of spoken. I wouldn't call it luxury surveillance, but with another term would be called like lateral surveillance, and it describes the sort of peer-to-peer watching through social media, cameras, and public platforms that have become part of our daily lives. And this isn't bad. But when I'm a company and I'm building a predictive model to sell you something or to keep you somewhere, I don't need all your information. Why? Because I don't need you to tell me who you are. I can just ask your friends. And this is a classic technique in recommender systems. It's called network-based collaborative filtering. To predict what you like, I look at your network. And to be honest, this is a really solid approach. It makes a lot of sense. In fact, our brains look more similar to our friends when we watch the same movie than those of strangers. So in this little figure, the red areas indicate higher synchrony with friends. And as we move more towards the right, there's like a greater social distance, so less friends. And then the blue indicates less synchrony. So basically, this paper basically showed that the similarity of your neural responses can predict your friendships. So the problem with today's AI models is that while they're really good at predicting things, they may not be predicting them for the right reasons. And there's a really great example of this. So there's a team at Harvard that trained a foundation model to predict planetary orbits. It did this really, really, really well. How much time do I have left? Okay. Oh shit. But when researchers tested their model to ask it if it understood physics, like gravity, Newton's laws, it failed completely. It was able to predict correctly where a planet was going to move, but for the wrong reasons. It developed these task-specific heuristics instead of really building a world model. So this is a similar example. The Amazon's hiring algorithm, I'm probably going to skip over this. They basically discriminate against women because the training data was mostly on 10 years of mostly men. And so it's not that the predictive model was like trying to use gender as like wasn't trained to like distinguish between gender, but it ended up using that as a heuristic. So it's both of these examples sort of explain how these models predict outcomes, but not really understand anything. And so the point is that if we deploy a model and they have a faulty world model, when we deploy them, we could cause unintentional harm. So despite this, humans, we're awesome. We augment ourselves. We went from horses to cars, which allowed us that increased our mobility. We went from phones to the internet, which allowed us to exist in multiple places at once. So thinkers like Andy Clark argue that tools like writing with AI or other sort of emerging technologies are extensions of our minds. And Plato once feared that writing was going to be bad for memory, but look at it now. Writing helps us do a lot of different and really interesting things. And so I agree with this sort of mentality. So Clark calls this the sort of biotechnological distributed self. So our biological brains are bounded by skulls, but our minds are extended by these tools. But not all extension is enhancement. I feel like we can all relate to how when we use Google Maps to navigate, we don't really know where we're going. We just follow the map. If I need to get somewhere, I just ask my phone. But there's some evidence that this isn't great for our brain and for our memory. And some of you might also relate to like the recent MIT study where people were using ChatGPT and the ones that were LLMs. And when you use an LLM, you feel less ownership of what you write and you remember less of what you write. So when we start to outsource a lot of our thinking, we have to ask ourselves, how do I want to live? Do I want to have an internal or an external experience of the world? The more our choices are externalized, the more I feel we could lead to our sense of self weakening. Right now, the US laws don't protect this inner layer. The layer of thought, GDPR, and others guard identifiable data, but the protections for neural data, or more generally, freedom of thought, don't really exist. There are some constitutional portions that sort of imply freedom of thought, kind of maybe freedom of speech, kind of maybe the Fourth Amendment, and kind of maybe the Fifth Amendment. So we aren't obliged to give the lock to our phone if it's like a PIN code, because it sort of acts as testimony, so we're protected from self-incrimination. But if it's like if we're doing the Face ID thing, then we're not really protected because our face is a physical feature. And this is something that some people have thought more about recently with like some stuff happening at airports. So wearables, BCI, Immersive XR, this is all accelerating. At the conference that I co-organized, Jared Genser, he's an international human rights lawyer and co-founder of the Neuro Rights Foundation. He highlighted how a lot of the laws for privacy, which might be like biometric information, don't really specify neural data well. And if they do, it's still at the level of identifiability. But thought, agency, it's still unprotected. So some scholars have argued that, maybe I'm going to have to like skip this cultural transmission. But basically, there's a cultural evolution that goes through the steps of evolution: variation, transmission, and selection. And events like these help shape how things are transmitted and then selected. And yeah, well, I guess I'll finish with that. Basically, there's incentive structure, and I'll just say this last thing. Being predictable doesn't mean that's like that we lack choice. But there might be a sense where like if we don't remember why we're making choices, we lose our sense, or we begin to lose our sense of self. And so maybe the incentive structures, like the socioeconomic incentive structures potentially forged by capitalism and other sort of systems that we've gotten used to, may not be the right ones to sort of allow these emerging technologies to flourish in the way that really benefits humanity. But yeah, that's basically it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rolando. Really appreciate it. That was an excellent presentation, and it was really great to get the science into that and all your perspective on this. Wonderful. Well, look at the house that we have here. I want to thank everybody for coming. We've had a lot of people join during the part of this, so I'd like to say again, this is the inaugural Metaverse Standards Forum Ethics Summit. And I want to thank all the speakers that we had for the next hour. We have another 30 minutes of speakers, and I'm really excited that we have Brittan Heller, Alvin Wang Graylin, Athena Demos, and Avi Bar-Zeev back to back. And if you all have questions, then please save them for the bottom of the hour, where we'll just sort of have a speaker panel and you'll be able to put them. If you'd like to start putting comments into the chat, we could do that and start selecting it. And one last plug for Metaverse Standards Forum. If you are not a member of Metaverse Standards Forum, it is free to join as a participant member. It is inexpensive to become a principal member. So if you're already a participant or not a member at all, please consider joining. And this event is presented by the Ethical Principles for the Metaverse Working Group, which if you are part of MSF, please join. And we are looking for co-chairs if you'd like to volunteer. And we also would like your input on the annual report, which will be constructed over this summer, edited in the early fall, and hopefully released in November. And with that, I turn it over to Brittan Heller from Stanford University, and also a board member of the Academy of Immersive Arts and Sciences. Hi, Brittan.
Hi, everybody. Good morning. I work at the intersection of emerging technologies, and the law. And I'd like to use our time together today to offer a few takeaways about how we can think about ethics in policy for XR and AI ecosystems, not just in theory, but in practice. And normally I take a legal lens on these type of problems, and in particular, use of international law and not just domestic law. Some of what I've said has been covered very well by other people today, so I may pass over certain things that we can get into more depth in the conversation. When we talk about ethics, it's very easy for our conversation to drift into abstraction. So when you talk about ethics and the law, what you really want to do is ground it. In particular, how do we create governance systems that prioritize human dignity, safety, and trust? To do that, I really zoom in on the concept of best practices. And so these are the things that organizations do, not necessarily the things that organizations say, that help ensure that technology serves people and not the other way around. So first, what does ethical policy look like? At its core, XR policy is, and its combination with AI, is about anticipating harm and enabling agency. This means creating systems that reflect human dignity, fairness, and responsibility before problems scale. Some of the best practices that I've seen emerging across organizations and governments around the world have included things that other people have brought up in other terms. One, co-designing with stakeholders, not just with developers, but with people impacted by these systems. Michael, in the earlier lecture, talked about the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, and that is actually the only international convention that was developed in concert with the people who would be most directly impacted by it. It's the only one. So it is a best practice that you can look at for how to develop internationally oriented standards in a participatory fashion. This means integrating voices from people with lived experiences who can flag risks that might otherwise go unseen. Other examples of groups that you might want to look at are historically marginalized communities and users across different demographics and age groups. Second is translating principles into processes. It's really not enough for a company at this stage in XR development to say we value transparency or we support inclusion. I would hope so. The real question is, how does this show up in your design sprints, in your content moderation workflows, and in your R&D funding? How do you incentivize the creation of explainable systems? For ethics to be functional, it must be operationalized. Finally, is embedding accountability mechanisms. So like external audits, ethics boards with decision-making power and red teaming from the start are all things that companies should aspire to. These type of mechanisms shift ethics from an afterthought to a system of checks and balances. And that's what I mean by embedding these accountability systems into corporate structures. When you look at the regulatory horizon, you're starting to see rapid movement globally. We have the EU AI Act, we have the US AI Bill of Rights Blueprint, we have other initiatives that are setting baselines for ethical AI popping up at the state level in the US all the time. But we're also in the middle of a fast-moving policy wave around the world. We have the EU AI Act, the US Executive Order on AI, may it rest in peace, UNESCO's neurotech recommendations. There is work being done by OECD, also by the Council of Europe, who has a series of work on immersive realities. I'm spearheading a study for them on freedom of expression, and also the ITU, which is a part of the UN, has a Cityverse initiative, and I've been running the part on digital worlds and the metaverse. So I'd love actually input from several of the people here, and I'm sure all of you, on how we can integrate this into smart urban design. Each of these efforts is great, but it signals a shift. Ethics is no longer optional because it's being codified. But there's a catch. Most of these instruments were written with general purpose AI in mind or traditional platforms, not embodied, sensory, and often co-created environments that really define XR. So that's where standards groups like this one have a huge opportunity and responsibility. We really need to focus on policy interoperability. To do this, we need conceptual clarity. So what does fairness mean in a space where identity can be fluid? How do we regulate manipulation when it's not happening through advertisements, but through ambient stimuli? How do we update legal frameworks to also account for embodiment? Immersive environments raise specific questions that current policy barely touches. And this is the crux of my legal research. How do we handle biometric data embedded in avatars or psychological manipulation that may come from hyper-personalized virtual environments? The best practice here is for proactive policy harmonization. Companies and standards bodies need to anticipate the convergence of laws across jurisdictions and aim for interoperability and human rights compliance and not just the meeting of technical standards. For a deeper illustration, very quickly, I'll highlight 3 recurring fictions that occur in XR AI policy ethics. One is consent and context. Users may agree to something when entering a space, but do they really understand what's happening with their data, their bodily movements, their gaze vectors? In XR, consent must be continuous and contextual, where users are informed, empowered, and able to say no in real time. And this is a paradigm shift from traditional notice and consent models. A second is algorithmic application of bias. AI-driven recommendation engines in virtual worlds can create real-world inequalities. So ethical policy needs to address both inputs and outcomes, looking at what data trains these systems and how these systems shape human behavior. Ethical policy needs to address not just what goes in, but what goes out and what the system is doing in the world. That's the piece that I haven't really seen embodied yet, and I'm incorporated into law. What behavior does it encourage? What norms does it reinforce? And what voices does it silence? Finally, there are governance gaps in co-created environments. The future of XR ethics lies in shared governance models, hybrid approaches that combine platform duties, user rights, and community-based enforcement. These are systems where platforms have clear obligations, but also where communities have real power to shape the rules and enforce them. The way to do this all is to look at ethical foresight. In immersive environments, this becomes a visceral question. It's the idea that our systems should reflect not just today's values, but anticipate tomorrow's challenges. To do this, you need to build in flexibility, policies that can evolve, adapt to new risks, new knowledge, and new use cases that haven't been imagined yet. It also means asking tougher questions. Not just, is it legal? Can we build it? Or does it optimize performance? But who benefits? Who's at risk? What are we normalizing by designing this way? And what kind of world are we designing? Who gets to decide? Thank you.
Thank you, Brittan. That was really terrific. So great to have the policy, the very important understanding of what is actually going on out there in the world, what's being done. So thank you so much for that presentation. And next we have Alvin Wang Graylin. Thank you so much for being here, Alvin. The floor is yours.
So, I'm glad that Brittan kind of up-leveled a little bit from technology to more of a societal kind of perspective, and that's what I want to talk to you guys about, because I think we're as a species, as an organization, as a industry, at a pivotal period in our history, and the technologies that we are creating today is actually going to change and affect our society very long term. So we are essentially going to have 2 potential outcomes because of the technologies that we're creating. Oh, wait a second. Yeah, so we're going to essentially have 2 different outcomes that are going to come from this technology, and how we decide and what we do as leaders in our organization or in our society is going to really impact this. And it is actually technology and storytelling that has made us successful. Our ability to have become the apex animal on this planet is because of our ability to tell stories and pass information knowledge between generations, and to use art and language and stories. And for hundreds of thousands of years, that's actually been our mode of operation and key of success. And we've been very in line with nature and in line with environments that we've been in, where we've had about 5 to 10 million humans for the majority of the history of our species. Unfortunately, over the last 10,000 years ago or so, we've moved from about 5 or 10 million to about 8 billion people. And we've essentially created this artificial scarcity, whereas in the past, we actually had relative abundance of our environment to our needs. And because of this artificial scarcity, our current institution and society have now been trained to hoard and dominate and create power. And, of course, the technology has brought us a lot of benefits and has increased our productivity over time. And, over the last 30,000 years ago or so, we've gone through various periods of economic and social development. And then each period, we've had different scarce resources, from time to livestock to labor to machine technology, energy, etc. We're about to have an opportunity where the technology itself will give us that abundance again in our society, and we become having time as our only limited resource, as we did back in the hunter-gatherer days. A lot of people will say, "Oh, at each period we've actually had different modes of operation, from egalitarian to more feudalism, capitalism, socialism, state capitalism." What I'm actually proposing is that we are about to enter a period, what I would call abundantism, if we allow it to happen. And people will say, "But that's having an egalitarian abundantist type of a mindset is very difficult because it's not in our nature." The reality is that for 95% of the history of our species, we've actually operated in an egalitarian type of a mindset and have been very successful and in balance with our environment. I made this little chart to help kind of explain how the different various social economic frameworks position in a 2x2 matrix. On one axis is the resource, and on the other side is how do we value humans, whether through dignity or whether through production capabilities. And all the current structures and frameworks that we use today are either looking at it as a purely humans as purely production facility, production resources, or they're looking at us as a high dignity, but it's still in a scarce resource environment. What I want us to do is to move our mindset to know that the world is actually going to be more abundant. And then because of that, and because of productivity that the machines are going to bring us, that we can actually achieve both dignity to the human, as well as sharing these resources, because we will have an abundant world. So Tesla said this. He said, science is but a perversion of itself unless it has as its ultimate goal betterment of humanity. Unfortunately, most tech science or what we call today technology is right now, because of capitalism, used for self-gain or personal gain or corporate gain. And we need to change that mindset. And particularly now, as we're going in this race towards AI and AGI, where everybody's throwing away all the guardrails and safety protocols because we want to be first to win this race. It's actually creating a negative impact on society. And it's clear that we're heading that way. Every single benchmark in the world is now heading, up and towards the right, and it will, and have, in many cases, have already surpassed the average human in terms of its capabilities. Even this thing called humanity's last exam, which early this year was about 20%, it's already now at 50% just a few months later. In terms of, and that was supposed to be the test that AIs aren't going to pass for a decade, right? Now, of course, AI and AGI has a bunch of good things it's going to do for what's going to bring, better understanding, higher productivity, free energy, solve our climate issues, solve our health issues, bring all of the ideas that would enable an age of abundance and the things that have been talked about in our sci-fi books and movies for decades, if not centuries. But of course, it also has its risk, right? It has the potential innate risk of an AI takeover if we don't align it properly. It has the job displacement risk that I think is becoming more and more real every day, and the potential instability in society that will come from it. And there are going to be people that are going to misuse it, whether for manipulation or misuse or for creating cyber weapons or bioweapons, etc. And then even states themselves are now using this technology to weaponize and to militarize and to escalate conflict. So all of these things is actually are real dangers. But I think the bigger danger is not what AI itself will do, it's actually what we will do with AI. And that's actually the problem that we have today, is that because of our mindset, we're doing the wrong things with AI. A lot of people, although are feeling kind of apathetic that they can't do anything about it, it's out of their hands. The reality is that this gentleman said something about 150 years ago that actually is very relevant today. Edward Bullard Lytton, you probably don't know his name, but you probably know what he said. He said the pen is mightier than the sword. And today, actually, the prompt is mightier than the sword. And what he was talking about is that by using words and story and writing, we can affect society, we can affect laws, we can affect the norms of how we work and coexist with each other. And I think that's actually more true now than ever, as we have all these generative tools that amplify our capabilities. And if you look at the stories that we have today, we have like the 3 possible futures that are going to come, and 2 are scarcity focused. One, the Mad Max apocalyptic future, one, the Elysium future of high stratification, and then the potential future of abundance that Star Trek talks about. And it's up to us by our mindset, right? Because if you look at Star Trek, it was actually the Vulcans that brought technology that enabled us to have that utopian world. And we are in an opportunity now where we're actually creating our own utopian world through or potential for that through making AI our Vulcan. We don't need an alien to come and save us. Okay? I recently wrote this post about a Bill of Rights for humanity, and in the AGI age. I urge all of you guys to take a little time to look at this. It's on the Abundantness account on Substack. And I guess my kind of last few is calls to action for you guys to understand that we have a high responsibility because of our ability to be here at this time, and our responsibility to our future generations. And if in different roles, we should all take that responsibility very seriously. If you're an AI lab, focus on safety over speed. If you're a content platform, focus on meaning over manipulation. If you're creators, and I know there's a lot of creators here, create impact instead of trying to gain influence. And corporate leaders, do good instead of just trying to get profits. And policymakers, focus on serving the people, not gaining power. And for government leaders, cooperation between countries, not just competition. And to focus really on long term. Not the short-term outcomes that everybody's looking for. So my last slide and request to you is that I'm actually working on something called the Bridge to One. It's a abundantism experience that uses all the technology that we've been building for decades to try to bring people together and to help change minds that have been entrenched for decades because of this scarcity mindset. And I feel like the things that we do in XR to be able to get the emotional attachment and understand viscerally how things feel. That is a superpower that we have. And if we can make the right content to tell this story, we can change minds and change policies. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alvin. That was a really great presentation. We really need more philosophy out there. So I really thank you for what you're sharing with the world through your abundantism. And I'm just going to roll right into Athena. Athena, it's all you.
So hi, everyone. I am Athena Demos, co-founder and CEO of Big Rock Creative. And I'm truly honored to be here. The group of speakers has been incredible. So for well over 25 years, I've been creating spaces that bring people together. And for most of it, it's been in the physical world, producing the LA Burning Man Decompression Arts and Music Celebration, which started at about 800 people and grew to 8,000. And I even co-produced the Art of Change inaugural ball for Barack Obama. All of these were about bringing people together. But at the heart of it all, there was one guiding passion: creating environments, both physical and digital, where people can connect, co-create, and express themselves authentically. And today, I'm the producer of BRCvr, which is the next iteration of BRCvr, which I'm sure a lot of you participated in during 2020 and 2021. And what we're doing is an immersive documentary experience about Burning Man built on a social VR framework. And then I also work with a lot of organizations and companies to help them apply the 10 principles of Burning Man as the framework of what we're using in BRCvr for building inclusive, mission-driven communities that actually work. And this is what I'm going to talk to you about today, the 5 pillars of participatory experience. So the big idea is that the Burning Man principles can be a powerful framework for building resilient, inclusive, and mission-aligned company cultures. We won a ton of awards for what we worked on. For me, being from Hollywood, I'm most proud of the prestigious Producers Guild Innovation Award, but also the Augie Award for Best Indie Creator. And I just like to toot our own horn. So what is Burning Man? I'm sure most people on this call actually know what Burning Man is, but in case you don't, Burning Man, this is Black Rock City. Burning Man is an event that happens in the Upper Nevada desert where 80,000 people get together, build an entire city, live in it, and then take it away as if we were never there, doing it year after year after year. This year is our 39th year. We'll be celebrating 40 in 2026. And it is the largest, longest running social experiment in modern history. But it's not just the event in the desert. It is also a community of people globally. Somewhere around 2 million people consider themselves a burner. And then we have an unknown number of burner curious. And we do events in other countries all over the world. There are events that happen anywhere from China, which is Dragon Burn I went to this year, to Africa, to Israel, all over Europe, and across the United States in 44 different states. There are actually over 120,000 people that attend Burning Man events globally outside of this main event. So Burning Man inspires people to be creative. It inspires people to connect in meaningful ways and to work together towards a common goal. And this inspiration is very powerful. So now imagine taking that form of imagination and energy and bringing it into your communities and your companies. And this is where the 10 principles of Burning Man come in. Now, I found these not only apply to the physical world, but also the digital world as well. And these aren't rules or guidelines. They're actually just a description of what it looks like when humanity is at its best. They're the foundational fabric for creative collaboration. And I want to point something out. All of them are actions. They are things that you do. We consider ourselves a do-ocracy. So if you look, it says communal effort or leaving no trace. They're actions. We achieve being through doing. And there's a lot of companies already exemplifying or actively using these principles in their company culture. So let's talk about the 5 pillars of participatory culture. Now, I developed these over the years, teaching the principles, helping people guide them into their lives, and the different modalities that they can use in the process. So the first one I want to talk about is my favorite principle, which is communal effort. So our community values creative cooperation and collaboration, and we accomplish more together than we ever could alone. And so I want to talk about the LA Burning Man Decompression Arts and Music Celebration. This is an event I started in 2002. And I don't produce it. I mean, I do produce it, or I did. But what I really do is facilitate thousands of people participating in something larger than themselves, which is ultimately what Burning Man is. And every piece of it, from fire performers to street cleanup crews, was built by people who felt a deep sense of ownership. High-functioning cultures are built by empowering teams to co-create, invite people into something bigger than themselves, and give them a stake, not just a task. And I find that GitHub is very similar in this regard. You can see communal effort, participation, radical self-reliance, easily in everything they do, even radical self-expression. The open source model encourages voluntary contribution, decentralized collaboration, and developer empowerment. Some early burners in our community were Google. And the first Google Doodle ever was Google's way of letting people know that no one was going to be front and center and that they were going to be at Burning Man. but they also have the principles deeply rooted into their company culture with their 20% time empowering employees to innovate on the clock while they're working. The second principle is use it as a diagnostic tool, the second pillar. When flow breaks down, check the principles. When we were doing BRCvr, I'm almost out of time. When we were doing BRCvr, we realized there wasn't a Mac client. We were on AltSpace. So we met with Alex Kipman and Katie Kelly on the Digital Playa, right where that viewpoint is. And Alex was like, what do we do to help? And I said, we need a Mac client, which is a ridiculous request to make of Microsoft. But in 2 months, with great communal effort, they were able to create a Mac client so that the artists, the DJs, and even the Burning Man office could participate in BRCvr. And that was diagnosing with the principles radical inclusion was missing and solving it with communal effort. So Zappos, Tony Hsieh has actually taken all the principles and baked them into the company culture of Zappos, including inclusion, communal effort, participation, immediacy, gifting, civic responsibility, and radical self-reliance. So I'm going to get through these really quickly in 30 seconds. So we need to design for participation. This is the biggest thing that I get on my soapbox about. We need to stop using the term UX. We're talking about XR. We're talking about immersive environments. We need to design for PX. We need to design how people participate with environments. We need to design how people are going to interact with what we are creating. And Meow Wolf does this better in the physical world than almost anybody that I've ever seen. If you've ever been to a Meow Wolf experience, if you haven't, go. If you have, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And this is a group of burners working together. Real quick, let the principles cascade. One goes into the other. So communal effort activates participation, which activates radical inclusion. Radical inclusion allows radical self-reliance and radical self-expression. And you'll see how they all cascade. And lastly, anchor in immediacy. The time to act is now. This is the 5-year plan. It's a right now plan. Nothing less than all 10 will do. You want to activate this in your communities. You want to look and find out which of these principles is missing and then activate it and get it going, because that will get your well-oiled machine going. And part of that communal effort is scanning that QR code and joining the Burnersphere community. You actually want to do that right now. We haven't publicly launched yet. And if you have a specific digital name that you want in this platform, it's one person, one name, and that's unique to you. So scan the QR code and at least set up your account so you can get your digital name. And thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you, Athena. That was wonderful. Much appreciated. And we're just a little behind time. Avi Bar-Zeev, the floor is yours.
Okay, let's get started. So I am Avi Bar-Zeev. I am the currently president of the XR Guild, and I've been working in the space for 34, 5 years now. And I've worked on a whole bunch of really cool things I'm not going to go over. At first, I just wanted to say all the presentations have been amazing today. Thank you very much. I'm honored to go last and try to bring it home with some actual ethical principles that I'm going to try to spend as much time as possible on. We have 7 and I have a few slides before that, and I'll try to get it done in 8 minutes, so I'm going to go fast. So the first thing that I always ask people is actually, how do you define ethics? Like, we talk about it a lot, but what does it really mean? And what does it mean to you is actually important, because most of us are not moral philosophers who have a very, very strict definition of what it is. And these are the 4 things that I find most people will answer. Well, at least one of those 4: moral or religious duty, a duty to each other, make the choices for the greatest good, at least harm. Or there's always one person, probably not in this crowd, but there's always one person in every audience that I give this to who says it's a bunch of BS. And the point is not so much which did you choose, but the next question is the important one, which is, okay, so now you've chosen it, but which moral or religious set of beliefs? And to whom do we owe this duty? Is it to a small group, or is it to everybody, or is it to all living things? How do you define it? If you're going to make the choices for the greatest good, what does that really mean, and how does it go wrong? And if it's a bunch of BS, potentially are you a sociopath? And is that why maybe you don't believe in doing good for others? I think the one that's most practical here actually is C, regardless of what you choose. They're all correct in some way. But doing the greatest good and least harm is the easiest to explain to people, even to sociopaths, because it doesn't have to deal with beliefs or social debts or cultural norms. Sociopaths can choose to be ethical if they simply understand that winning for them means customers should love their products long term. And we can all think of a bunch of high-ranking executives and even CEOs who probably are sociopaths, but they still can make good products if they really care about being successful in the long term and not short-term exploitation. The problem is this definition is called utilitarianism. It's also been used to justify effective altruism, eugenics, and even genocide. And the reason for that is that if you devalue people, any group of people, you can justify things that benefit the people that you value and harm the people that you devalue. And so it's incredibly important that you include everybody in the calculus of what is ethical. You can't exclude anybody from that equation, or else you will almost invariably result in harm to the people that you didn't consider or devalued. So how do we really get this done? How do we determine the greatest good and least harm? And our approach at the XR Guild is to start with a set of principles. And I think the most important thing is that we include everybody in the development of the principles. It's great that we have professional ethicists and policy groups and lawyers. They're all very talented and very knowledgeable. But the process needs to include everybody. And the reason I got into this in the first place was, as a computer scientist and a designer, I noticed I had never had any ethical training in school. There were no classes on ethics. There was barely a philosophy. And we need to be teaching everybody, because all of the makers, designers, PMs, developers, they need to understand, why are we trying to be ethical? How does it matter? What does it mean to be ethical in order to get the outcomes we want? Because as we all know, a policy group can be fired just as easily as they're hired. What matters is educating everybody in the field to be able to do the right thing at every decision point along the way. And as Brittan said, the outcomes really are what matters. So here are the principles. In the time that I have left, let's try to go over these. And I lost the clock somewhere, but I think I'm doing okay. We have 4 minutes and 7 principles, so I'm going to try to do these quickly. But the first principle, of course, because if you devalue anybody, you can go wrong, is that every person matters. This should be principle number 1, I think, for anybody forming their principles. You don't want to put this one last. I think this is probably the most important. And this is where accessibility and fairness and integration come in. This is just another way of saying DEI. We can't use those terms anymore for some reason, but these mean the same thing, that we should care about this. And it's a very practical matter, because mutual respect enables participation, and the quietest voices are often the most important to hear. Those are the ones you really want to listen to, because they don't get included as often. And you have to make space, and you have to encourage them to speak. Not just people like me who have no problem speaking up when I need to, but everybody has to be able to be included. HCI, which is really what we're talking about, not just XR or Metaverse. This is all about human-computer interaction, and we're just talking about the latest iteration of that technology. Has to prioritize the well-being of all of us. And I think the most important thing to talk about here is, I think as Rolando is saying, is that privacy is really not the linchpin here. We don't just want to talk about whether or not you're identified. What really matters here, and as Nita Farhani's book, Battle for the Brain, talks about, is cognitive liberty, our ability to choose for ourselves and to not be manipulated externally through psychology and technology to be able to do what other people want us to do. We have to have that freedom of choice if we're going to be fully actualized individuals. And privacy is simply a condition that gets us to that. And we should put it in that context. It's not about the privacy, it's about the liberty. We need to have ultimate control over our interactions. Software, of course, needs to eventually become interoperable, open, and extensible. It may not start that way because big companies are financing this and they don't all have an interest in making it so, but eventually it will be as we build the platforms and normalize it. And the standards should be made clear to everybody, especially when we talk about community standards in virtual worlds. That's relevant to the MSF. And other things like individuals having a right to present their identity. Now, we all know about the patterns. We used to call this dark patterns, but I think maybe we want to call these negative patterns as a more general term. And what matters here is, again, empowerment and the loss of consent that happens when we have these negative patterns. This includes the terms of service and the EULAs that we're forced to sign in order to even look at the software in the first place. We have to click through these things and we don't understand them. They're confusing. So they represent neither informed consent or any kind of consent. And then there are many other kinds of exploitation that we have to avoid. And misinformation online is another example of where our consent and our rights are taken away. We have to be extremely careful about technologies that enable those. I'm going to speed up a little bit, just in the interest of time. And the last couple are more relevant to the Guild. So importantly, people have a right to know and control how their personal information is used. This is critical, and this is very relevant to what's going on with AI and how things are trained. We should have a right to inspect or revoke access to the data. We also care about impersonation. I'm very happy that Denmark is taking steps to make sure that people's physical identities are protected legally, that they can't be used. But finally, we have many members in the Guild, and some work in the ad tech side of things, and we want to recognize that advertising is a form of speech and hence protected. So what we really care about, though, is giving people a choice, giving them a clear choice as to how they're included in that process, and they can choose to opt out if they want to. When it comes to AI, we spent a lot of time on this year. The members come up with these principles and we work together. We talked a lot about AI, and the net is that we think AI is great, but we also want to be super careful. We want to make sure that the people who originate ideas and create them are given credit, potentially compensation, but also that eventually things move to the commons, that these technologies are good for everybody, and the end result should be used for everybody. I'm going to skip that one. One of the things about the Guild is we want to make sure everybody knows that they're responsible, that everybody has a part to play in this. And finally, the seventh principle is the purpose of the Guild is to share knowledge and foster understanding so that we have an informed and responsible community. And that's what we're really all about. Final slide. If you're interested, I just gave a talk at AWE that has 5 complementary ideas that go with the principles. These are the secret sauce to design. If you want to be successful, these are designs, and the link above will take you there. For some reason, I'm not sure why AWE hasn't made it public yet, but there's a link to it. And there's a QR code that will link you to the actual principles that I've bridged a bit. Last thing I'm going to mention is that the Metaverse Standards Forum is really set up for companies and organizations. Individuals want to join and participate, and one of the ways you can do that is by joining the XR Guild. We can give you an email address that will let you join the Metaverse Standards Forum as an individual, in a sense representing the Guild, but you can join yourself, and we'll try to make that as easy as possible for you. So come check us out, and we're happy to help in that regard. Thanks.
Thank you, Avi. That was terrific, and thank you for all the work that you do specifically around ethics. As many of you may know, the Metaverse Standards Forum is not a standards body or SDO, but the XR Guild effectively functions as an SDO for ethics. And so I highly encourage everybody to look more into their work if you're not already familiar, and join if you're not already a member. And so with that, first, let's have a big round of applause for all of our speakers. Open up your mics, go to the react button, hit the clap. Let's all thank our speakers. And I'd love another class picture if everybody wants to turn on their video. And I would also like very much for us to transition right into the Q&A. We are just about 5 minutes over the intended, so we've got about 20 minutes for Q&A. We can stay longer as long as everybody wants to stick around, but ideally we have 20 minutes. So to make this as democratic as possible, the raise hand button will do it in the order of it. So if you click that raise hand button right now in the React, then you get to go first. And so who has got a question for any of the speakers who are all still here to receive them? And this is effectively a panel of speakers. So, and I also want to give a shout out to Kat Moynihan, who's here. She helped draft the charter of the ethical principles of the metaverse, and she's a member of the privacy, cybersecurity, and identity working group at MSF, which is another interesting reason to join MSF. So got Dylan Fox. Everybody else, please raise your hands for the questions. Dylan, who's your question for?
Hi, Ben. open question, I think. And just brief, I'm Dylan Fox. I'm Director of Operations for XR at Cornell, and Michael's co-chair on the MSF Accessibility Working Group. I would love to just hear some discussion from any of the panelists. The idea that, we've had a lot of experience at this point of telling people, hey, here's how you can make things accessible. We have these kind of design principles and all these things. And yet there's still a lot of things that aren't accessible out there, right? And I think part of that is because we live in a society, so to speak, and oftentimes you kind of have to force people to do the right thing, especially companies that are driven by shareholder motives. And so my question for the group is, considering that the federal U.S. government is not perhaps in a position right now to pass a lot of ethical regulation on AI and XR and things in general, what are the best ways to encourage people at any level in terms of leaders of organizations, local or state governments, or any other way? How can we make sure there's actual teeth on anything that we're talking about here today?
Thanks. I'd like to call Brittan to answer that one, since you didn't single anybody out. That's a policy question.
I knew you were going to do that. Dylan, I think there are teeth. They may be small teeth, but they still bite. If you look at the Americans with Disabilities Act, and there is one holding that I'm aware of so far that talks about XR, and it holds that basically a Netflix-like application for XR experiences had to follow accessibility guidelines as set by the ADA, because it created a public forum for people to gather. And this is an administrative law holding, which is why I said it has baby teeth, but there's still teeth, because with that holding, you can actually go to companies and say, we know it's great to be accessible and to do the right thing, but if you don't, it's a litigation risk now. And the argument was made that the company was just a purveyor, like Amazon as a bookseller, and that was rejected by the courts. They said if you were going to have a virtual world like that, you needed to make sure that everybody could access it. So it's a small but very important holding. Even though the federal government may not be poised to push through large initiative, there's a lot of work happening on the state level as well. And if I were going to do a survey and look, I would look at some of the AI regulations being pushed forward by states as a starting point, because of like the convergence that I talked about. That's kind of the template that I'm using to say, like, but wait a minute, this also applies to spatial computing. Not a great, not legal advice, not a litigation strategy, just interesting things to think about.
What was the name of the case you mentioned there?
I will email it to you because I have Friday morning-itis and cannot remember off the top of my head, but I'll put it in the chat.
Brilliant, thank you.
Thank you both. I don't see any other hands raised. Come on, let's get some hands raised here. Let's hear from people who haven't spoken. We've got anybody. All right. Paul, is that you talking there? Paul, do you have a question? Everybody's invited to go to the react button on the bottom and click raise hand to speak. Okay. We don't have a follow-up question there. Does anybody else have an answer to Dylan's question? Any other panelists, speakers?
Well, I'll go next. Again, I'm Mohsen Rezayat from Siemens. I think one thing that would push companies is impact on their reputation. I'm sure you all are aware of the chatbot called Tay that Microsoft put out in 2016. And they had to bring it down in about 16 hours because it had turned into a bigot by collecting all sorts of information. And as soon as they realized that this is more trouble than it's worth, they brought it down. Or the Google glasses originally, because of bad reputation that it got, it was pulled. So anytime that the company reputation is in danger, it pushes the company to react and try to do the right thing. It's also getting pressured by its customers and what they are demanding. So it has to come from the users, but I think it is a multi-pronged pressure that forces companies to react and do the right thing.
Avi.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point to answer, to keep answering the question. But I think what we've seen, like a good example with AI was companies were very hesitant in many ways to put out their AI until OpenAI went and put theirs out that broke a lot of the norms, and everybody's like, oh no, we have that too, we got to push ours now. And so where Google and Microsoft might have been more hesitant, all of a sudden the floodgates open and everybody wanted to get AI and everything because no one wanted to be last. So as soon as the companies got into this really arms race, then a lot of the constraints went out the window and all the ethicists really were all of a sudden fired and not listened to anymore. And I think that can happen. And so we can't necessarily rely on the companies thinking about their reputation when they all have the same incentive to break the norms together. And I think the answer that I would give you, Dylan, is the norms, I think, are what matters. The norms are what keep, society functioning. We can't police everybody. We can't stop everybody, who does wrong. But given everybody expecting good behavior, and especially among the makers, the developers, the PMs, every little decision they make along the way will default more to the right answer than the wrong answer if we can educate everybody and expect this from everybody. That can break down too. But I think that if we only ever rely on the law to police these things, we're still going to miss a lot of the cases. And there's still going to be people who have enough money and enough time to fight the government or wait them out. And I think the most effective thing is the ground up approach, where we just really make sure everybody understands what is the best practice and how do we do this. And we teach it in schools. We just indoctrinate it from day one so that everybody knows.
Thanks, Avi. Brittan?
This is more the airing of grievances part of the session. So I teach a technology policy colloquium, and one of the things that I took away from the last session was I hope we can all make a pledge today to stop talking about things using the same language. To just, I think one of the best ways to kind of foment change and push forward conversation is to describe things in novel ways so that people pay attention to the phenomenon and not latch on to the buzz. The example of that I'm gonna that I hope we take away today is stop talking about human in the loop. Like please stop talking about human in the loop. We invited somebody from Stratcom, like from the military, to talk about AI ethics in combat for the class, and they basically spent an hour describing why that is not a realistic paradigm for a product development pipeline, and in particular for applications like high-risk applications like autonomous weapons and AI in conflict. Basically, he described how it's not a loop. I would describe it more like a luge. Like R&D platforms start way up here decades back and then go all the way forward. And by the time you get to the one person who makes a decision, that's really a fiction for a lot of the way that these products are deployed in actuality. There's not one person. So it's more about building accountability-based processes throughout, and not, I feel like when we talk about human in the loop, that actually kind of punts the football down to some non-existent one person who has that decision-making authority. So my hope is that we start talking more about not just our substantive rights, not to transparency and liberty and autonomy and all of that. If we talk about those, to talk more about what those actually mean, but to talk also in tandem about procedural rights and sort of what that foundational baseline of rights allows us to do, and what what our relationships with companies and governments and all of that really manifests as. So substantive plus procedural rights, and stop saying human in the loop. Those are my Those are my gripes.
I think you have a wrong concept about human in the loop. It's not one person.
Oh, what
It is
we are
the
saying,
entire company.
we are agreeing violently
So
here.
every decision that is made at any level needs to be validated by the human. That is the whole idea of human in the loop. It's not that there is one decision maker at the end that lights up some green light and says yay or nay. It is the fact that we should not. I mean, look, AI is statistical in nature, right? It can never, ever be 100% correct. Never, ever. Trust me, never, ever AI will become 100% correct. Even if you're talking about autonomous driving, and you tell me that the AI is correct 99.99% of the times, are you willing to sit in there and let AI drive you around for the rest of your life? No, because there is still 0.001 chance that it will see a truck with the blue painting on the side and thinks it's a sky and runs right into it, which is that's happened. So you have to check every single decision that AI makes. And therefore, it happens at all the levels. But that's what we mean by human in the loop. And it's extremely important, in my opinion. We should not ignore that. We should never allow, in safety critical applications, for AI to make the decision. So that's what we mean by
Yeah, I'm not saying to discount the concept of human in the loop. I'm saying to talk about it in a more realistic form for how decisions are made and products are developed.
Sure, we don't know. We are definitely in agreement there.
Alvin.
Yeah, so I guess the question about enforcement, I feel like if we are dependent on going through the normal legislative process and to have it be actually international versus just national or state, it could take decades. Right? And I feel like if that's the case and everybody becomes apathetic, that we can't do anything about it. And the reality is that we're living in a world right now where anyone can have access to billions of ears and minds if we actually speak out and if we create the right content and if we activate our networks. Anybody can be a TikTok star with a piece of content that they create and access a billion people, even if they had 0 followers. Right? So I guess my point of this is that rather than relying and waiting for official bodies to change the way that people think and perceive and act, is that we actually need to take some responsibility upon ourselves. And as I said earlier in my talk, I feel like with the tools that we have today, you can create very compelling content, whether it's 2D content, 3D content, music, art, whatever, to express these messages in a way that can appeal to different audiences. Just like 15 years ago or 13 years ago when glass came out, and because of the public outcry, that device was essentially withdrawn. Right? I'm not saying it's a good or bad thing, but the fact that a few people making these things very visible created a force that pushed a very large company to change their decision making. And I think right now the danger of the companies right now that are monopolizing the AI space actually needs to hear more of the voices from the people, versus waiting for regulation to happen, because the reality is that they are actually the ones that are pushing the regulations to stop regulation. And they have the power and the lobbyists to do those things. So if we are relying on regulation, we're all going to be very disappointed. So this is why I was the last slide I had in my talk is that I want us to actually create content that can change minds. And I think people like us who have access to these tools, who have access to the community, who have longer term mindsets, should take that responsibility, because we probably see more and understand more than a lot of the average person out there. And so we need to take that knowledge as a responsibility to do something. So that's all.
Create content that changes minds. That's nails it.
Exactly.
Bravo for that. Chad.
Oh, camera. Yeah. great session. I've heard a lot about the metaverse and a lot about AI. And I'm just wondering whether or not we're talking about two different ethics or the same ethics, or are there points of conversion of ethical principles? Or is there a universal ethics that kind of crosses everything over? So I'm just trying to tease apart how we're approaching AI, how we're approaching the metaverse. These technologies are going to converge, but are the ethics also converging, or are they different, the same? What's your view? And just one throwaway comment on regulation and disappointment. In Europe, we have regulation. I think you'll find we have a different kind of disappointment from countries that don't have regulation.
We've got a hand raised from Anne. Do you want to take Chad's question, or Avi, was your hand raised in response to Chad's question?
I think if Avi, you were going to respond to that, go.
Okay. Yeah, I think, I mean, Chad, as you probably know, that it's really hard to separate already the technologies of AI and what we call the metaverse, that they're so intertwined. Computer vision, scene understanding, especially in spatial computing, these things are critical. So you can't just say we're going to have one set of ethics for this and one set for that, unless ChatGPT and a text prompt might not be called the metaverse, but that lasts 10 minutes, and then all of a sudden we're going to have avatars talking to us in a human way. Right. It's all going to come together very, very quickly. But to the question of, is there one set of ethics that covers everybody? I think no. I don't think there is one necessarily standard set of ethics, because every application may be a little bit different. And what I'd love to see, a good application of AI would actually be as an ethical assistant to say, what is your application, and therefore what ethical principles apply. So let's help you customize the ethical principles for your product or your company based on the extent, the domain that you're working in, because there'll be terms that won't necessarily apply to what you're doing or may unnecessarily constrain you. I think that can be customized with a little bit of help. And we just keep evolving our principles anyway, because things do change over time. So every year we have new versions, and that's our method for now. But I think in a few years we'll have some sort of an AI helper that will be able to help you sort through that for your specifics.
Thanks, Avi. Anne.
Yeah, so we talked about pressure from people. We talked about government pressure, legal pressure, pressure from norms. I think another layer of pressure is industry or expert organization pressure. So that happens in a couple of ways. One is advancements made by one company raises the bar for other companies that may not have those features. There are also folks like myself that are internal to companies that are part of the risk review process. And any way you cut the cake, lack of access to certain technologies is a risk. Then there are like advisory councils of experts or groups like this that provide governance principles or alignment on norms and rules, standards, and other principles. So layers upon layers of formal and informal governance effectuate change.
Thanks, Anne. So that brings us to the top of the second hour. We don't have to rush out of here, but I just wanted to be mindful and respectful of everybody's time, and thank everybody again for being part of the inaugural Metaverse Standards Forum Ethics Summit. Appreciate you all. I had something for Greg Lindsay. Did we lose Greg Lindsay?
No, I'm here, Ben. How can I help?
Oh, you are. All right. So you brought up, you had the dating app, the unethical dating app. Could you unpack that one a little bit? Because that, like, of all the great presentations that we had today, that one kind of stood out in my mind as, oh my God, please.
Sure. Well, I mean, that one, as I mentioned in passing, there was a lot in there. But yeah, just to go back quickly, Cluely is a new startup that, yeah, their entire mantra is cheat on everything. Roy Lee, who is the founder of this, who's taken money from Andreessen Horowitz, quit Columbia, as sort of this very controversial hypermedia figure. But the reason that one stands out to me is of several respects. Number one, yeah, this use case, which has come up over and over since Glass, this idea that the use of personal XR is to basically gain an informational edge over someone. I watched a demo. It was a startup in 20 2013 and 14, I remember, where it showed a man using a glass. He was basically hitting on a bartender by going into her Facebook profile and pulling up pertinent bits of information. And so I think of this one in the case of like, what is the ethics, between the developer and the user is one thing, but then between the unintended or the intended target of the user and the ethics of that, and these are the kinds of tools we want to build. So that plays out in all sorts of contexts. I've written for over a decade about various efforts of actually by startups and others trying to join together information and social networks to basically create these kinds of advantages to understand people, whether for fundraising or other things. I wrote a piece. It was a company called Relationship Science that did this. No XR required back in 2013. But anyway, that stands out, and I think about that a lot in the context of how these tools will be intentionally or unintentionally weaponized, and also just it's interesting that the primary use case of this tech of wearables with cameras is to basically prey on women. Like that one's kind of unmissable to me. So I just use it as an example of that particular technique there. But yeah, that's sort of playing out there about what are our ethical accountability to people who will be the unintended targets of this, or will be dealing with not understanding the devices and technologies that are at use, and what does informed consent mean under those conditions as well. So I hope that makes some sense, but glad I could introduce you all to Cluely. It's quite the startup, let me tell you.
Well, it really had some shock value into it, not just in the fact that it exists and that it is sort of, in my opinion, unethical. But the fact that this is, a top tier VC is investing in this very laissez-faire, and it is a little creeped me out a little bit. It's a little disturbing that this is out there, and this really speaks to why we have this working group at Metaverse Standards Forum to not single out any particular thing, but to be talking about why it is so important that we build ethically. Avi.
Yeah, that's a great point. I hadn't heard about it clearly, but I'm completely not surprised because there are a number of people in the field who really have this as their goal, is to give you this superpower. They'll even describe it as a superpower. And I've had many conversations with people like Keiichi Matsuda where there's a flip side to all superpowers, right? Superpowers can be used to hurt people. They can also be used like Superman to try to help everybody. But there's where that whole responsibility quote comes back in. But I think the thing that a lot of people may know this, but they may miss it, is that I don't think glass, it didn't go away, right? It existed, it just wasn't marketed. But it didn't quote fail because simply of privacy. It wasn't just about the photographing. It was about the power imbalance. The glass created a power imbalance between the person wearing it and everybody around them. And all products have that capability. Meta Ray-Bans have that capability. I think Meta's been very careful about how they rolled it out, even though they have cameras. And what you really want is not to create a power imbalance, but to level everybody up. If you're going to give one person a superpower, you want to make sure that superpower doesn't hurt the people around them, but also helps the people around them and brings everybody up to a higher level, whether they're wearing the technology or not. So the same device could be designed to be beneficial to society and groups of people. In a sense, with cameras, it could be figuring out ways to provide information to people around us or new facilities, even if they don't have it. In many ways, that's beneficial to the product maker because it makes the device more attractive, makes the device more wanted. But we have to avoid anything which levels up one person at the expense of the other. And this is why people are even careful about eye glow, because if you see somebody wearing a wearable and you see the glow happening, you have to sit there and wonder, what are they doing? Are they looking at my Facebook page? Are they gaining information? And in that date situation, you might even have a blowback because the person is not making eye contact anymore. They're looking left and right and up and down. You can tell they're reading something, and that's going to be a social faux pas as well with these devices.
So true. I have a follow-on to that, but Michael's next.
Which is also a follow-on, but one thing about resolving the power imbalance is if one person levels up, well, the other person levels up. But do I want to be forced to adopt a particular technology? If I choose not to, am I a Luddite constrained to the depths of history? What would I'm curious about how an ethical perspective would address that.
Anybody?
I mean, you want me to try that? So
yeah, go for it.
I think we have to assume people don't automatically opt into that. I think we have to ask. And a good example that it was brought up before was about the warning light on the Meta Ray-Bans. And there's a lot of thought going into making sure they're visible and undefeatable in terms of covering them up. I mean, and I appreciate those efforts. But there's a more fundamental question, which is, even if I know that your glasses are recording me, how do I avoid it? If there's 100 people around me that all have the glasses, I can't go anywhere and not be recorded. And so the warning is useless at a certain point, at a certain saturation. And I think what we want to be thinking about is how to enable consent. And I asked this question during a presentation at AWE, and how would consent work? Let's say, for the sake of pictures, just as an example, what if we just don't assume people want to be photographed? We assume they don't, and we automatically blur or remove or use Gen AI to replace people with similar but not the same people in photographs automatically, unless we have their consent. So for the people in your contact list that you're willing to be photographed by, we already have their face. We know what their profile looks like. So the device can say, oh, I have consent for this person. I'm going to let them through the photograph. So your friends and family and children, you know, that you've opted into, they're all fine. They're all in your pictures. But for all the innocent bystanders, we actually use technology in this case to assume they haven't given consent until they do, and replace them or blur them in the way that Google had to blur all the people's faces in Street View everywhere in the world as a result of Germany's privacy laws. I think we're at a stage where we could consider this and say that's a reasonable expense to incur for the sake of assuming people have not given consent until they do. And that can be applied to other technologies as well. If Glass had done that from the get-go, right, had launched with the same face blurring technology that they had in Street View, it might have been a very different story. That wouldn't have changed everything, but it would have changed one dimension of the concerns that people had.
Avi, I totally agree with you. But then there's like another sort of like more subtle issue, which is like when you start replacing people with some generative AI version of them, then you're modifying their self-representation, and they didn't consent to that either. Right?
Well, no, it's not meant to be them anymore. So now you're taking them out of the photo and putting in somebody who's not them, but is not. They're different, and they're not the same identity at this point.
Right, totally. That's fine for photos, but for video, you know, there's mannerisms that the person has, and so like then the video loses its functionality as like, you know, maybe a storytelling tool of like how people respond or something like that when like it's been modified to be someone else, and so that person didn't consent to that altering of their self-representation either.
Yeah, I understand.
Yeah,
and there's things like tattoos. There's all sorts of things to consider that we'd have to do. It's not as simple as I said, but I think it is doable. I think we can find that balance.
Yeah.
The thing that really struck me, I think, Avi, it was an earlier comment to Greg's point, was how the sort of duality of how this technology can be used by different people for either, you know, nefarious or good purposes. And, you know, my mind goes to, you know, just having a family conversation around a dinner table and a trivia question comes up and no one knows the answer to it. And it's like, oh, here, let's Google it. Let's chat GPT it. And, you know, if that's coming up in your glasses and so forth, and you have the answer to it, then, you know, that's sort of a harmless thing. But when you're using these tools to scan the other person, you know, reading their intent, looking up information about them, and doing something a little bit more creepy. I mean, it really comes down to, you know, bad actor versus good actor imbalance there, where we want people to have the technology to empower them, but yet if we give it to them, we have to have sort of a level of trust in place. And that's where really ethics comes in. And, you know, ethics ultimately then comes down to how the individual is willing to use it. And so before we go, does anybody else want to raise a hand, have a question for our remaining panelists? Thank you all for sticking around. We're already 10 minutes after and the gallery's shrinking, but this has been really wonderful having all of you here. And anyone?
Hey, Ben, can you put the link for the August portal crawl and the town hall here, as someone was asking about those events?
Yeah, absolutely. I have not published the link yet. I did put out a save the date card, but as long as we're going to plug Metatraversal, Let me actually do a couple of plugs here. First of all, Metatraversal is an event series that was created with Ivo, Terry Schussler from Deutsche Telekom, Neil Trevette, and myself 4 years ago already. And it was actually influential in the creation of Metaverse Standards Forum. Neil went off and actually built out an industry-wide consortium here that we're now enjoying. And Metatraversal is an event series where we are advocating for interoperability. And one of the ways that we do that is we have a series of portal crawls where we actually jump from platform to platform to demonstrate this. Evo has been hosting all these events. We've had support forums, sort of summits. We've had a play at AWE in 2022 that several of us were involved in. And but the portal crawls where we demonstrate this, we're going to follow up the 6th portal crawl, which is on August 22nd, with one on August 20, Town Hall on August 26th to talk about what we learned. So please pay attention. And there is a, actually, there is an event.
There's a LinkedIn event. Yeah.
There is a LinkedIn event. If I could find that, put it in the chat in a moment. I've got Paul Higgs, so let me call on Paul and let me dig up that link, and then I have another plug before we go. Go ahead.
Yeah, so thanks. I mean, I'm going to ask an open question. I mean, this is hosted by the MSF, and we're doing a lot of things. We've got a lot of facets in the MSF. We can take on a lot of different projects and from a lot of different experts. So I want to ask the panelists today, all the people who have spoken, what needs to be done? What's the one thing that they think is missing to enable a vision that we have all this transparency, this openness, this clarity on ethics and everything else that we need to have to make the metaverse a reality? I mean, it's going to struggle until we get all these things in place.
Go ahead, Avi.
Sure. One thing, it's not, it's really many things, but you heard my answers before, I guess, about education and school. That's a 10 or 20-year process of start teaching the next generation and educating professionals. But if I had to pick one thing for the metaverse specifically, the thing that's missing in everybody's conception of the metaverse is police. You can't rely on the company that's putting out a particular space to adequately police it because they have certain interests and it's not necessarily aligned with all of the users. We're going to need some norms of the concept of police. We can't have a society without police. Why do we think we can have a virtual society without police? And so what does that look like? Who does it? What are their ethics? What are their guidelines? Those are things that have to get worked out. But it's almost always missing in every conception I've seen of the metaverse, is that layer of enforcement beyond just AI chat moderation, which is clearly not enough.
And Greg?
I'll just go quickly because my particular focus is on urban AR. One of the things that's been interesting for me, spending time mostly over in the real virtual world integration working group with James and Stephen and others, is that they're working on their sort of initial use cases, ride hailing. Like, okay, so I spent a lot of time in urban circles where Uber and Lyft and how they disrupted public space by using their private business models was, yeah, it took cities a long time to adapt. There's no one from any cities or any government that I can tell of who are in that working group. And so I want to go back to Avi's point that, yeah, that basically this conversation around where all of our work touches upon other actors in the real world, those actors have yet to be drawn in. We still need to make a better effort. And I've tried. I'll be taking part of this recording to public officials, my cohort, to be like, will you please join the Metaverse Standards Forum? Will we please have some voices in there? Because there's a lot of understanding around some of these use cases and their analog efforts that we should be pulling in that kind of wisdom. So I still think there's a lot of people who are missing from the conversation, and it's not everyone's job here to bring them in, but I'm trying to figure out how we can pull them into this.
That's several great points in there. Thank you for that, Greg. Anyone else? Hani, Aaron, I saw you turned on your videos. Do you have any questions for the panelists?
Sorry, I just joined, so I'm just give me a moment to to share something.
I'll go next if that's possible.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Okay, Aaron, if it's okay if I go ahead, this will be quick. It's just a quick question. I just wanted to run by you guys. First of all, amazing talks. It's always great to see people still passionate about the metaverse and responsible at the same time, because there's this big race. When there's money and profit, the sharks run, and it's a pleasure to see the responsible minds behind this trying to control what's coming, because the future is coming whether we like it or not, at least for it to be a bit controlled. My question is, we have been working in my company. I'm the product manager of Wondersook. We have been working on a web-based technology that engines. We actually finalized those engines. We create 3D virtual immersive worlds, web-based, and the ethics subject was always on the table for us, like, because we wanted to build communities where people can socialize, communicate, have fun, immersive environment. We built already a demo city and do real-time shopping, interactions, etc. My question is this concept, in 2022, at COVID times, this was the talk of the town. Is this still a valid uh, like idea, subject, product? Like, will people still adopt a VR immersive? Will they interact and adopt a VR immersive world where you can choose your own avatar, jump in, do real-time purchases, shop together, uh, communicate, build communities, etc.? Is this still a valid concept? This is my question through your experiences.
Go ahead, Avi.
Yeah, I guess I'm always first to jump in, but uh, I actually don't think so. I think that a lot of people got excited about reading science fiction and thought that that was just going to happen the way it was portrayed in the books, especially Snow Crash and Ready Player One. I think it'll evolve towards that over time, but as you're seeing that with the rapid, adoption of smart glasses, as opposed to, people care about their first lives. They care about the real world. They care about their friends and their work, and mostly about communication. And it's going to be a very slow process of people jumping into a second life in an additional virtual world. And what it's missing, like I said, is the safety, police. It's missing a lot of the things that we need when we get together en masse. But it doesn't mean we won't have small scale versions of it, right? This Zoom call could be replaced tomorrow with an RP1 world or a spatial IO world that has us all in here as avatars, and that would work. It works almost as well today. There's some things missing. We like seeing each other's faces, and so the fidelity isn't the same. But in terms of small scale, what I like to call consensual reality, that we all come together for a purpose of people that we relatively know and there's a set of rules, that of course is going to happen. It's just not going to be everybody everywhere all at once for a while, until we've worked out the kinks with safety, especially.
Thank you. Thank you for the share.
Someone else had their hand raised with Avi there. Does anybody else want to go? Okay. Does anybody else have a question? Okay. Oh, Chad. Hi, Chad. Go ahead.
I wanted to ask about the police force. How does that work when so much of what currently constitutes the metaverse would be illegal in the real world? Mainly murder, killing. I mean, there are different norms and different ways of approaching things, particularly in kind of the gaming metaverse. We're talking about a different sort of metaverse, aren't we, Avi? I mean, but I'm just interested in how when we've got these simulations which enable us to behave and do things in ways that we can't in the real world, how then we have an ethics which lands up with a police force.
Yeah, I just actually posted on LinkedIn about, there are people who think that reality is a simulation and therefore they treat it like a game, and they think it's okay to hurt other people in the real world already. So that's not, but even without what you're saying, there's still different jurisdictions, right? And so how do you have a police force in a place that doesn't have a physical location? Whose jurisdiction is it? That has to get worked out. I don't have the answer to that, but the short answer to the killing other people virtually is there have to be an agreed set of rules among the participants. If you and I were to jump into, a first-person shooter game where we could kill each other, we've agreed to a set of rules, and we've agreed to the possible outcomes, which means our virtual persona may get killed in that game. It's consensual. We've agreed. You can't really consent in most places to kill other people in real life. Assisted suicide might be one of those examples of where it varies from place to place. And certainly capital punishment is a place where we've accepted it for better or worse in some places. But those rules need to get worked out. We need to figure out ways for people to consent. And it might be space-based. So when I enter this particular location, the rules are published. I understand what they are, that I understand if I come in here, I might get spray painted with paint guns. If I come in here, I might get killed because those are the rules I'm accepting as I come in. But people who don't accept shouldn't enter this particular subset of space to allow that. That's the best early answer I could give you, but most of it has to get worked out through agreements among, and between the various worlds and spaces.
I'll just like to say on the question of gaming, first of all, I agree with Avi's consent model there, but just on the idea of first-person shooter games being as pervasive as they are, I think it, on one hand, gives a bad impression of if people look at the metaverse and immersive technologies as that, because the large percentage of it, some stats have it at over 90% of immersive experiences are gaming, and many of those are first-person shooter. So yeah, there's a consent model, but it gives me great pause that people take such relish in killing each other when there's so much more good that can be done out there. So I'll just leave it at that. But we have other people who have joined, have their video on, haven't raised their hand or asked anything, like Julian, Dario. Hi, good to see you guys. Do you guys have any questions before we go?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
First of all, I want to commend everyone, Ben and all the speakers. It was a great session. Just to follow up on the metaverse, I think even more important is connectivity and standardization. Where are we with that? How's the metaversals been going as far as that is concerned?
In terms of standardization?
Yeah, the idea that I can just...
Well, I mean, I think that there is an ethical question around having standards in the first place. It really helps level the playing field and being more ethical. Like, as far as how it's going, I think that we're by having the Metaverse Standards Forum and other bodies, the SDOs themselves, that are bringing together a lot of really smart people to solve problems in a way that will help accelerate the adoption of technology by lowering the barriers of entry, is a positive force, and continues to be a positive force. In terms of how effective it is, I would say that the reluctance of certain companies that are territorial and trying to maintain proprietary leverage over their systems, patent trolling, things of that nature, that are holding back the ecosystem by placing limits on companies' ability to engage. I'm known to be an advocate for standards, so yes, I certainly push in that direction. I also am very pragmatic in terms of the real world of intellectual property norms, and so I welcome anybody else to answer that. How is it going? I'm just grateful that we have forums to be able to do that. And Julian.
So yeah, this is a great segue. So the reason I built the Virtual Worlds Museum is when we were talking about the interoperability I realized that there's no mapping of how big is the metaverse, how many virtual worlds do we have, what's the taxonomy of that, right? And that's what I've been working on with my team for about 2.5 years, and we're getting to the point now where we have like an extended list that we can actually create a visualizer and see it. So number one is to identify all of the virtual worlds. And what Avi was saying is really important about the policing part of it. I come from the transformational festival world with electronic music, and we utilize different nomenclature for that, right? You can have something like guardians or guides. And you need two parts of that coin. Not only that you accept whatever the norms are for that world, but then also the world themselves need to police themselves. So it has to be like a two-part system where as a user, you go in and you accept these terms, but then they create some safety guards, which they're not really geared to do that right now because all they're trying to do is survive or make a buck or try to own the metaverse, right? So if all of the platforms adopted a guardian model and all of the users understood what that is when you go enter these spaces, then you meet halfway. And I think that's the only way that that problem can be solved.
Right. Yeah, that's I think Julian, what you're doing with like the museum is super awesome and super important. And I agree. And also with obvious points, but I also wanted to bring up another point that I think that this is where maybe regularization can come in. If you know, there's like more focus on enforcing antitrust laws and monopolies, then companies would be forced to become interoperable to ensure a competitive equality. And you know, as much as like, you know, there's like a lot of these grassroots efforts to try to push for interoperability, it's not really going to happen. I think as there's no incentive for a company to want to make their world accessible from another. That might be something that has to go into like antitrust law.
Well, I mean, I think that that's very interesting. I don't necessarily agree that there's no incentive. There's actually a lot of incentive because that interoperability can bring people to your platform just as easily as it can take them out. And Chris Madsen of Engage actually had a great analogy when talking about how, you know, it's sort of talking about it as a street with different types of bars. And, you know, you may have a bar for your particular flavor of enjoyment that you would want to go to. And if, hey, this platform isn't your bar, you may have friends in there that you want to be able to go in and out, but you can transition from it at will. And it's really the sort of the freedom of choice that makes the interoperability an ethical choice for companies to make. And
yeah, I mean, I totally see that, but then there's like sort of a internal conflicts of interest that kind of occur with that. And I mean, it's going to be a lot more to unpack. But in the bar example, you know, if I have a really cool bar, I'm gonna try to do as much as I can. If I'm trying to compete with other bars, I'm gonna have, you know, a special deal. I'm gonna do all these things. And like, what's even better? Let's say that you have to go to an island to go to my bar. You can't really get to the other bars, and so you know, while I like, it's nice to think that, and I do think as a long term, longitudinally, having like that interoperability will, you know, sort of spread everybody and make everybody happy. I mean, think about just Apple, you know, with like their really, you know, quirky cables, and like, you know, everybody else in the world was using USB or USB-C for charging, for everything. And then Apple comes in and tells everybody, no, you have to buy this like $40 cable to charge your phones. And that lasted for years. It wasn't until really recent where like now we have the actual USB-C following the standards that everybody else had. And these kinds of standard things are usually brought down by regularization. And another great example is railroads. Railroads had to be standardized because there was too much. And through, I think, something related to antitrust type of regulation, because everybody was like, hey guys, you know, this is like getting out of hand. You know, the tracks were different sizes. They were like, you know, crashes were occurring. There wasn't any. So anyways.
building safety codes, you know,
Yeah,
or
basically,
a
yeah.
perfect example of ethical standardization.
Yeah, but that was top down. That wasn't bottom up, is I guess my point.
True. So with that, is there anybody else? Haiti, do you have a question? Albert, we haven't heard from you. Muadh, you've stuck around with your thing. Anybody want to contribute before we go?
I have tons of questions, but one that keeps coming up is really just with all the different branches of AI and the metaverse and all of the different definitions that might be sort of caught in litigious situations, how do we avoid creating ethics that aren't as complicated and just unreadable as like the American tax code, for example? I'm so curious. How do we make it, you know, we've talked about things like glasses recording people, you know, if I'm at the park with my kids, how do I avoid my kids being recorded and things like that? How do we make it so that just regular, everyday, you know, participants of society aren't caught in legal conversations with Google, for example, over whether or not they should be recording my children.
Avi, you want that one? I saw you nod.
Yeah, no, it's a real issue. And then I think one of the points I may have said really quickly in my talk is that these terms of service and EULAs that we have to click through are not consent. They treat them as, lawyers treat them as if they are. But if we don't understand them, and most people don't even read them, even if you click the box, that doesn't work. And they're complicated, and most people aren't going to understand them. The only solution that I can think of right now, some companies have tried to make them plain English, but they're still long. So plain English, or whatever, substitute any language, isn't necessarily the answer. I think this is a place where AI actually can help us. And I think what we're going to wind up having in the next couple of years is something that I would call our personal AI shield. So there needs to be an AI that works for us, that is on our side, and its job is to read those terms and in some ways negotiate on our behalf, or at least tell us when there's something going on that we won't like, because it works for us, it knows us. And that doesn't really exist yet, but there are some startups forming potentially around that idea. The most important thing is it has to work for us. If that comes from a big company and they claim, just like a big company claimed to make a VPN that collected our data, the purpose of a VPN is for the companies not to collect our data. And the purpose of an AI shield, it also should not be for the company to collect our data. So that needs to happen. We're going to have to pay for that. That has to be something that we're gonna need to buy, because it has to work for us. So some ways we're going to have to fund it, and unfortunately, that creates a class divide as well, where there's people who may not afford it and people who can. That is a whole big ethical question about that too. It's kind of the only answer I can give you at this point. We need to do better on it for sure.
Certainly. So we're going to hear from two more people before we go. I just want to thank everyone again. And in particular, I want to thank the team at Metaverse Standards Forum, Kendra Casper and Jeff Phillips, who have been behind the scenes adminning and run the session for this. So thank you, Jeff and Kendra. Much appreciated. And again, if you're not a member of Metaverse Standards Forum, please join. Hi, Kunal from India. Good to see you. And lastly, we have an event called Mission Responsible that happens to precede the Polys every year. We have an award called Ombudsperson of the Year, and both Avi and Brittan Heller, who you've heard before, are previous honorees. We have a successive honoree. Ingrid Cope was the 2024 honoree, and we're going to find out soon who Ingrid selects, and then we're going to have a conversation at the end of November. And so I invite you to look out for that. And we're going to close off after Asya, after Andre. Andre, please go ahead.
Hello. Thank you. And as others said, I'm amazed by the contents and also expositions like I had the pleasure to hear. So about, I think Heidi's question has two parts. One is the ethics frameworks will be complicated, and themselves can be easy, and there will be a part of scientific dissemination. The same thing with the scientific dissemination. How can you get this information to people? First, I think infographics, XRSI does a very good work, for example, in teaching ethics for kids. I have on the page a thing for kids or for parents, working, which inspired me to work on digital literacy for parents, for school kid parents. So there will be a lot of work of simplifying this, and maybe with visual tools. So how you get that? There's the tools of dissemination, but the ethics framework for themselves can not be uncomplicated. So the other thing which Avi mentioned, how do we experience that when we have to sign something to give, for example, informed consent? Nowadays, informed consent can't be informed at all, because we can't understand, and even the specialists can't understand what consent will involve. For example, we have the catch now and harvest later in artificial intelligence. Or what does happen if you give consent to use your microphone? You give consent, you have no clue what can be done with that and what will be done with that because it's evolving too fast. So no informed consent nowadays has a way of being really informed. And I don't believe AI will help there because the main problem with AI is confidence. We will think we will create a confidence that it knows it. And AI is based on bias, it's based on quantity, it's based on, there are a lot of limits, and who's deciding, who's programming, the same excellent questions you made, Abby, of after, behind the first question comes the second level of questions. And we can put all this meta context behind the AI helper. And the main problem is we will trust him. So yes, I'm not very confident that we will find a solution. But the main thing, again, getting back to the question that was about informed consent. About the question is form people with the strategies of visual and so on. Thank you. I hope it wasn't too confused.
Well, thank you, Andre. Asya is our last question. Go ahead, or answer rather, if you prefer.
Yes, it's rather yes. It was also the answer to the question, and also very much resonated with the thing Andres said. So I think in our cases, definitely we need to somehow a bit separate the cases which really address the legal implications, the privacy implication as it is, because for that we basically already have sort of legal solutions. But the ethics, as we discussed today, is not just always only about privacy issues, something higher level. It's something which is not specifically bounded by law. So here, again, I don't think we have really a straightforward solution. The only thing I would like maybe to mention, we have now several European projects funded by European Commission specifically addressing these questions around how to create ethical standards, what could be inside of this higher level ethical standards. And one of the discussions we have, and sometimes when we discussed with colleagues around these topics, is that we need somehow lower the levels and have some ways, some instruments to create this hands-on ethical things for specific cases, which hands-on mean understandable from the end user perspective, from the stakeholder perspective, for developer perspective in the same way. And in this case, it can be very applied ethics. It's something, some steps you're taking in and applying to your concrete examples. And this should somehow report to the higher level concept and higher level ethics. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, that brings us to almost 2 hours and 40 minutes for this, and over an hour of amazing panel Q&A. So thank you all for staying with us and being present for the inaugural MSF Ethics Summit. Really appreciate your time and effort and enthusiasm. Again, please, we really welcome and invite your participation in the development of the first annual ethics report from the ethics working group. So we'll be putting out additional calls for that. We will be having additional meetings coming up. So please participate. We'll be drafting an outline and hope to have this report on best practices in ethics in the metaverse coming out sometime around November, hopefully. And if you're interested in the details of that, please have a look at the charter that Kat and I helped develop. Hi, Kat. Good to see you still here. And I hope you've all enjoyed. And thank you again.